I think AI is still looking for that killer use case in a lot of ways, and I think education is like number one. You need to double your leads for this month. Like that's impossible. Like, dude, this guy is like building rockets to Mars. He's building a 7 billion. Like, come on.
Yep.
Kind of bring it back is like that's what I think people aren't just ambitious enough.
Today I'm talking to Charles Lee, a Korean-American founder who built Coder School in Ho Chi Minh City. It's great to meet you, man. I don't think we've had the pleasure to chat, right? We were in different cohorts. So yeah, like both of us basically iterative cohorts. I was in the first one, you were in the second one, if I'm not mistaken. And you're running Coder School. That's
Correct.
The name, right? Coder School?
Yeah.
And I was going through your LinkedIn and I didn't realize this. You're actually fully American, right? It seems, at the very least. Yeah.
So
born and raised.
As fully American as one can be. Yeah. American.
Okay.
I'm Korean. I explained like I'm Korean American, so I was
Korean, cool.
Born in the U.S. Yeah. So my
very
parents
cool.
were born in Korea. I was born in the U.S.
My wife is Korean, so I know a little bit.
Oh, what?
Yeah. Wow. She's full Korean though. So I'm learning all the cultural differences between Korean American, like Koreans, and how they see each other basically, because it's a whole different culture at this point.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Like actually, I always talk about this. So actually, my wife is also full Korean, so I'm getting married actually in 3 weeks.
Congrats.
Thank you. And it's funny that like once you're like kind of similar, the differences become much bigger. So I feel like with you, like I don't know about your situation, but I would imagine like your wife's family would like not know exactly what to give some things, but like with my family, it's like they know exactly like what city is she from? Oh, she's from that state.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. It's like,
no, I know what you mean. It's more flagrant when you're assuming they'll be the same, but they're obviously different. Exactly. Is what you mean. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, I've had amazing experiences in Korea, man. I have to say, it's one of my favorite places to go to. And one of the reasons why we're living in Southeast Asia is to be closer to her family and be able to travel more often. So yeah, good stuff. Do you speak Korean?
Some enough.
Okay. I'm learning, man. It's such a tough language. I know a few languages, but Korean has to be the hardest one. Maybe it's because I'm getting older, but wow, it's like night and day from any Latin languages or whatever.
I will say I think it's not tonal, which I think helps a lot. But
reading and writing quite easy, right? I mean, you obviously probably were raised with that, but for me, it was something I could learn in a couple hours. And I'm legit saying that because there's like courses on how to learn to read and write Korean in an hour. It's quite easy. But yeah, speaking it, I'm trying every week. It's just gonna take a while. Cool. So you live in Vietnam, right? Which city are you in?
Ho Chi Minh City.
Ho Chi Minh City. Okay, cool. So you've been in Ho Chi Minh City since 2015, correct? Or were you there before starting this business?
No. So before coming to Vietnam, I did come to Vietnam in 2015, and I didn't come with the idea of starting Coder School. I had come from San Francisco, where obviously there was a lot of startup stuff here and there. I was part of that crowd. So my career started at big companies, and then over time, I found myself drawn to smaller and smaller companies. Happy to talk about that until eventually I tried to start my own company actually in San Francisco. And so I did that for a year and a half, 2 years maybe. And it was a lot harder than I thought. So, even moving from early employee to founder, I was like, oh, this is a bigger jump than I realized. Perhaps my CEOs I was working for were not as dumb as I thought. And so I was trying to take a break, and that's how I ended up Vietnam. I was like, you know what? Like, actually, I was like, this is not for me. I'm an engineer, so I was like, I didn't realize how good I had it as an engineer. I just code all day, get paid pretty well, things like that. So the one thing I always felt though was that I wanted to live outside the U.S. for a little bit. So despite being Korean, I was born and raised in America, and I feel very American. I visited Korea a bunch of times, but never like really saw. I feel like I've been on vacation places, but people are always telling me things like when you live somewhere, it's a totally different experience. And so I've always been curious about that. Like, what would it be like to be somewhere for a month or 2 months or 3 months, not just there to like see the the Lonely Planet guide.
Totally.
And just so happened that Vietnam was on the list. And when I came here, the whole story behind Coder School was, I think one is I was kind of a nerd and I didn't really know how to meet people. Like once you realize I'm going to be here for 3 months or 6 months, you're sort of like, I need to like meet some real people, and
Yeah.
it's not clear how to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
what did I do? I went to like tech people like meetings and stuff on
Yeah. Tech meetups.
meetup.com. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing leads to another, and people ask me what I do, and actually I didn't really know how to answer that question because I didn't have a job, and I didn't really want to get in the whole thing of like, well, I tried to do startup stuff and it didn't work out. That story got really
Mm-hmm.
boring and tedious to tell. So what I told people was I was a coding teacher, because that's
Okay.
actually something I was doing. So I was moonlighting, working part-time for a former housemate of mine, actually, who did start an online coding school back in 2014 or what it was. So when I explained that, the immediate reaction I got from most people in Vietnam was like, oh, you should do that here. Like, there's no coding school here.
Very cool.
So that's how Coder School kind of got started.
And like, I know that Vietnam now is, one of the top hubs, or at least spoken in that regard as a top hub for developers, at least in Southeast Asia. It wasn't the case in 2015, I assume. Things are kind of moving quite rapidly. So you're like you said, there was no coder school, early adopter in terms of teaching people to code. Are you responsible partially for like the massive growth that Vietnam has seen in the last 10 years for developers?
I would like to say that, but no, I don't think it was the case. Not yet. Hopefully, I can answer that question a little differently a few years from now. But the thing you said is really interesting, and it's something about Southeast Asia that I find I only appreciate after living here for a while, is that each people tend to think about Southeast Asia as like one country, but obviously if you live here, you realize that it's not one region, right? Everyone's very
For
different.
sure.
But when it comes to talents, I find that like particularly interesting. Like people sort of have this idea like, oh, Vietnam's good at coding. Like Singapore's good at finance or something. Thailand's good at design. Like they have these different types of things. Philippines is good at customer service. Like these kinds of reputations sort of occur. And I don't know if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy or what, but I think that sort of like reinforced itself. But specifically when it comes to Vietnam, no, Vietnam had that reputation, I think, a long time ago. The coders are good. But the thing I found really interesting is that despite this reputation, I couldn't point to an educational institution that was like the best. Like, oh, Vietnam has the best coders. Is there a really good university, or is there like what's the MIT of Vietnam? This kind of thing.
Yeah. How did it happen?
And there wasn't something like that. So
interesting.
I was like, oh, how did that happen?
Do you have an answer? Actually, I'm curious. How did that happen without a proper curriculum in place, or like anything standing out from the rest of Southeast Asia, as you said?
Yeah, I think there is. I think compared to Southeast Asia, I think maybe Vietnam, maybe Singapore, both have sort of this like Confucian math and science STEM slant. So I think like kind of historically, people are like, you should be good at math, and I think that's highly emphasized. So I think that's probably root of it. I think the Vietnamese government has interesting things. Actually, most people have to study coding in school.
Okay, I mean that's pretty intense. Oh wow.
Which is really out of date. So that's an issue that's a little bit out of date, perhaps. But the people get exposed to it early. So I think those things have really combined to be technical.
It adds up. And how's the geopolitical landscape for businesses or startups in Vietnam? Because I know, as you said, Southeast Asia is super fragmented. Every country has their own rules and regulations. And this is something we could talk a lot about, but Southeast Asia should not be seen as one single region. So how is it to start a company in Vietnam right now? Is it easy?
I think that it is not easy, but it's not because of the regulations. So I think it's challenging to start a business. We can get all the different reasons, but often people who are asking me about, hey, is it hard to start a business in Vietnam, are sort of asking about the regulatory, like what paperwork do you need? Is it clear? That stuff is super easy.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's certainly, there's some nuance to it, but that's not the reason that most companies fail, I would say. It's because of that.
Okay. And there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's two types of founders for startups in Southeast Asia. There's foreigners who come to Southeast Asia, whether they're born in abroad but from a heritage of Asia, and then there's locals who want to start a business. Is it foreigner friendly to build something in Vietnam, or not really?
Yeah, I think it's extremely foreigner friendly. So I was really surprised by that, actually. So I really don't think I've ever felt like sort of hostility from anybody. Like, what are you doing here trying to like run a business here? I think people are genuinely like excited about progress and developments. And
Okay.
it's a similar feeling. I always talk about how it feels a little bit like San Francisco used to feel. Like when you just have an idea or something new, people are generally receptive to it. And it's not about like where you're from, or they're just more
Right.
interested in the actual like output, which is cool.
Okay, that's very cool. I think like one of the main things that, foreign startup founders would look at is how easy is it to get a visa and things like that, because certain countries that don't make very easy. I live in Thailand, and it's not easy to get a visa if you want to build a startup here. You have to go through certain institutions, and they have a pretty high rejection rate and things like that. So just curious if that's like, it seems a lot more startup friendly in Vietnam in that regard.
I think the situation in Vietnam is a little bit dynamic. It is. I mean, I think if you've lived in the region long enough, you realize there are often many ways to get to the output. Like there's like the official way,
Sure.
and there's like other sort of ways that are sometimes faster, sometimes slower. But yeah, it's generally not a huge concern. I thought Thailand actually. So by the way, like I didn't realize you were in Thailand. Like I thought they had some like amazing program where
Yeah, I
you
mean,
get
they
like all
built an
this tax
amazing
free.
program
Yeah,
on paper. So
I
I
see.
think early on, they really wanted to attract a lot of startups. And I don't know if you know this, but as much as the economy here is really nice, there's a big middle class. The number of startups is one of the lowest in Southeast Asia. I think Boston Consulting came out with a report a few months ago, and they report an official number of 185 startups, which, this, that it's like one batch at YC right now. So it's kind of ridiculous. So yeah, they do have a program in place, but I hear the rejection rate is quite high. They're very picky on what type of startups they want, which, it's fine. They should be picky, but I think it's deterring a lot of startup founders from building anything in Thailand. On top of the fact that, like the language barrier, the whole culture is different from whatever they might be familiar with. It's a lot easier, let's say, to start something in the Philippines where people speak English to start with.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a few challenges in Thailand, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure they're working on that. Cool. And what about fundraising? Just to give you a bit of background, I started a business 5 years ago in the Philippines, a fintech business. It's now been exited, but when we started, getting money in the Philippines was close to impossible. The only countries that were really funding, or like that were targeted by VCs, were Indonesia and Singapore. It's a lot more common now, but I'm curious about the funding in Vietnam. I saw numbers where, compared to the height of 2021, it's pretty much collapsed now, but I'm just curious what you're feeling on the ground.
Yeah, I always have all these questions you're asking, by the way, like I have to be a little careful about. I do think that's maybe one thing that in the region, like I don't want to, I feel like in the US, whatever, you can kind of say whatever you want.
Sure.
Here, I want to be a little bit more like,
Be as careful as you need to be.
yeah, as you ask questions about sort of like government or landscape or these kinds of things.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
No worries.
My feeling is actually, yeah, it's challenging for everyone across the board. I think perhaps like venture capital as like the traditional model of like, the ones that made the grabs and that kind of thing is sort of maybe under some scrutiny. I think there's a growing sentiment that, hey, like perhaps the US playbook does not apply one-to-one with the Southeast Asia playbook. Like perhaps they're not going to be the Ubers and the WeWorks, the SoftBank type model. At the same time, like I feel super bullish about it for two reasons, specifically Vietnam. One is, I mean, you talk about all this like capital available in Indonesia. I think to me, it feels like it's sort of crusted. How much more? How are you going to make 100x gains in Indonesia? It's like it seems a lot harder now.
Right.
And so I think people are going to be drawn to where the sort of opportunities are. Thailand, yeah, it seems for some reason like GDP growth is sort of not strong, and the outlook is sort of like I think mixed. And so people are looking at, I think, Vietnam as a viable option. Where else is the money going to be deployed? The VCs have to eventually deploy their money somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I think Vietnam's like a strong candidate. So I feel pretty good about that. But like underneath all of this, for the stage that Coder School's at, despite us being around from 2015, I think as a mixture of like both its leadership and the industry we're in, it's a little bit of a small. It's like it's been a slower sort of progression. So we're not huge now. So our next round would be like an A-ish round. And
So you raised 2.6, right? A pre-A, something like that.
Pre-A,
right?
Yeah.
Was
So
that, how long ago was that?
That was 2021.
Okay.
So oh man, it's been 2.5 years now.
Yeah, time flies. Yeah.
But for that reason, I think that like we're so much in control of our own destiny. So I feel like if I can just double our customers every month, it doesn't matter if like Vietnam's not the coolest place to invest. Perhaps if I
Of
was like
course.
Series C, Series D, or trying to exit, right, it would be a different conversation. But right now we're still so
So
small
let's
that
talk about that though. Like, I'm curious about Coda School, like where you guys are at right now. If you can give me some numbers, tell me a bit more about the business, how you like. Obviously, you're teaching people how to code. You're placing them, I believe, like you have a placement agency style model. What's the whole structure, business model? What are some numbers you can throw at me? I'm very curious about it.
yeah. Before we get numbers, let me just clarify what we do. So we're trying to build online education. So it didn't
Yep.
always start online, but for the past few years, it's been a fully online experience. The big observation is like, look, there are big companies out there. For example, I think Coursera is a great one. I think 600 million revenue every year, but still not something I would recommend to most people, especially within the context of Southeast
Mm-hmm.
Asia. Like if someone came to me and was like, "Hey, Charles, I really want to be like a data scientist. What should I do?" And I'm not sure. I'd be like, "Hey, you should go sign up for Coursera. That's like 10 out of 10
Mm-hmm.
what you should do." So maybe there's some context where that makes sense, but I think at least in our region, this is not the right option. And so when I think of what else can they do, like how do people want to become data scientists or product managers or all the UI UX designers, when it comes to this whole spectrum, it just seems like there's no good options anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of crazy to me, especially in 2024, why that's the case. And so what Core School is trying to provide is that sort of relevant, useful, actionable career training. Right now, we
Okay.
specialize in software and data science. So we do like a web
Okay.
development course, and data science course. We're rapidly looking to add more catalogs. So 2024, it's really about adding more and more things. Before this call, I was working on our new game development in Unity course.
Ooh, very
So
cool.
that's next. But there's just so many like new things to learn, and there's all these trends that basically are sort of pushing, I think, education a lot faster. Like we're gonna
You
have to
guys
learn
have
a lot
anything
more.
blockchain related or not? Not yet.
We have done some blockchain stuff in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone else in 2018, actually, I
Mm-hmm.
played with the idea of like we should pivot to be like the best blockchain school, and I didn't quite do that. We ran some blockchain courses, so we ran some Solidity courses, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something we're definitely looking at.
Okay. And these are 3 month courses, just like kind of the standard. Like there's a lot of them in North America as well, right? 3 month program, and then you try to place.
Yeah, so our model's a little bit different now. So we've done that 3 month thing before. Now the way it works is most of our classes are 6 months long,
Okay.
and they're one-on-one mentor led, meaning
Oh wow.
we
Okay.
have all this material on Coursera and stuff, Coursera style, like we have videos and exercises
Mm-hmm.
and a whole learning platform. But then every week, once a week, you have to talk to someone one-on-one, like this.
Okay.
And to me, it's like a really simple structure, but it's also like how most people learn most things. Like, if you're trying to learn how to play guitar or swim, you wouldn't go to class for like 8 hours a day to do these things. You would, have a lesson once a week, and then in the meantime, practice on your own.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do with technical skills. And the other thing I find really interesting is, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this too, as the market evolves, sort of the difference between people often ask me what's the difference between engineers in Silicon Valley that you've seen versus engineers here. And I think the question is not even about engineers; it's about like sort of like all startup employees. And I haven't found a better word to use than the soft skills piece, although it's like that term is like really overloaded. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just like things around communication, critical thinking, proactivity, like getting the right things done. Specifically when it comes to, for example, data science, a really palpable example is anyone can sort of learn how to calculate the average of these numbers or like the standard deviation of these numbers.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's not really what data scientists are being paid for, right? They're being paid to be like, oh, actually, you should sell like this. You should open an hour later on Sundays or something like that's what the people want.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to these things, like I just don't know why, but you can't learn this stuff from a book, right? You have to sort of talk to someone. Same thing with startup founder education, like right, like there's no book out there that can really teach you startup stuff, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not complicated. It's like you should find product market fit. You should, stay lean. You should, like be profitable. Like these are all very
Yeah.
simple concepts, but it's like you have to sort of be in these conversations or have mentors or people to
Yeah.
sort of
Agree.
explain it to you, and that's what
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
do.
Okay. That's really cool. And so the business model is that the students pay you upfront anything, or you place them and then you take a cut for a year or some.
We had the students pay us up front. We've done the other model too in the past, and it's actually like one of the most successful experiments we ran. but it became sort of hard to sustain. And
Mm-hmm.
I think
It's
sort
more
of
of an
now
agency model at that point, right? It's a bit tricky.
agency model, it's a bit tricky. Also, like there's no real guarantee that you're going to get that money back, I guess. Like, I mean,
True, true, true,
can,
true.
can it scale to $1 billion business? Like, it's sort of unclear. And a lot of schools that sort of thought they could have sort of been struggling. I think also specifically for the sort of region, collection of debt is like a more complicated thing in Southeast Asia
Right.
than it would be in the US
Yeah.
or Europe.
And if you end up placing them or they place themselves abroad, how are you gonna collect on that as well?
Yeah,
It's kind
there's
of
all these
tricky,
things that go
right?
into it.
Yeah.
And also, as you think about like as you start a company, right? Like, what do you want the main focus of your company to be? Like, I think if you start, so we thought about going down the model and we did, and there's certainly ways to solve all these problems. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you end up being more of an agency, or you end up being
Yep.
more potentially like in the best case, you end up being like a fintech company, right? And I
Right.
was like, well, I'm not sure that's like where we want to go for the
I've
sake of
been there, and yeah, being on the collection side is not fun at all, especially in Southeast Asia. That's literally what the fintech was doing. I mean, lending and collecting. So yeah, I'm familiar. And in terms of numbers, so I saw publicly that you had 2,500 alumni, probably a lot more now. That's probably old news. So tell me about that.
yeah. So we're fortunate to have had a lot of people over the years. So I always hesitate when I'm coining these numbers because we just had so many different versions of the model. So
Right.
actually,
Yep.
the very first class we ran was like this free agency model. So we teach you for free, but then we would place you and like make money on the recruitment fees. That's
Mm-hmm.
how we made our first $1,000 at Coder School, and I thought this is going to be great. And so through that, we've had, and at one point we had a sponsored program. So Facebook came and paid us to run like these large community programs at scale. We taught like 800 people that way, 800 to 1,000. So that number is like high. Today, what we have is well, this year we're hoping to get to 1,500 students a year. So
Wow.
like roughly 100 graduates a month.
Amazing.
They're online programs. Yeah.
And how big's your team? Because I'm assuming you have quite a few coaches or teachers or educators, right?
Yeah. So the brilliance of our model, I shouldn't say brilliance, but like the really nice thing about our model is that a lot of our teachers can be part-time. So if you're teaching someone 101, two things kind of happen. One is you don't need to prepare like for hours, like the way you would need to prepare for like this podcast. Like I didn't have to prep for it because I knew I was just talking to you 101. But if I was going to give a speech in front of 100 people, I would be like up all night, like thinking like,
yeah,
oh,
I get
I say it down so many times. So it makes it a lot easier to hire people part-time. So we have, I think, roughly 80 people who are part-time now, who are teaching between 1 and 5 learners a week.
And you mentioned earlier that you were thinking of raising Series A. Is that in the next few months, or what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like a wait and see approach. I think I'm curious how you think about it. And you've certainly sort of been farther down this road. It's like if you need to raise money, you can't. So and if you don't need to, you can. So there's like this like sort of thing situation. So then if you take sort of a step back, it's like, well, do I want to be in a situation where I need to, or do I want to be in a situation where I don't need to?
Yeah, so you have enough run rate right now that you're not stressing about it, but you don't want to get in that position, right?
Yeah, and then also as you forecast growth, though, it's like, well, how aggressive do I want to be? Because I could be really aggressive and be like, look, if we want to bring those numbers, if I want to, I just said 1,500. What if we want to make that 10,000? Like, what would that be?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
right.
Like, do you want to take those swings? And it's sort of
and where does that, in terms of forecasting, where do you need to be to be profitable? Basically, that's what you're thinking, right?
Yeah, and eventually. So the question is, eventually, and the question is like, how eventually? And yeah, and it's like, well, do I hire these, like, do I grow the team really fast? And all these questions. For us, I think we're operating on the assumption that, and this is sort of a debate. I don't love it, but I think fundraising is going to be hard. So we're trying to operate on the assumption like, well, what if we never fundraise again?
Okay.
What does that
and that's
like?
an option?
I mean,
you have to be quite close to profitability, I guess, right?
Right.
It's only an option in that case.
Right. But then, I mean, it is definitely an option. But also it's like, well, there's this deeper question of, well, I didn't start this business to, I mean, I was breaking even just sitting in my apartment by myself. Like I was a zero apartment there. So I was like, well, after 10 years, like, right, I finally got to break even. Like there's something there, but also it's like, not exactly the aspiration I was
we've definitely all been there. Like that's something you ponder on quite a bit as a founder. So you're talking about growth right now. So what's your biggest challenge? Are you trying to grow I call it user base, but I guess you call it your student base, or like how do you go about that right now?
Yeah, so that is our biggest challenge, and understanding sort of all the different pieces that go into it. I think my background's on engineering, and so I haven't ever been like really a growth guy. But then I've had the fortune of sort of having some excellent people join the team who've taught me a lot about that. I
Hmm.
think you're also a growth guy, so you could
I'm a
probably
growth guy,
speak
so
on that a
I'm
little bit.
I'm nerdy about that stuff.
Okay, I mean, I think there's some really basic stuff I've learned, but just like number one is like this transition. I think every company does this in sort of everything, but like the way that I used to sort of run is like very conceptual. Like I got a good feeling about this. And early on, I think as a founder, you have to sort of make these calls. You don't have the luxury of
For sure.
investigating everything, right? And then but that breaks apart very, very quickly when it comes to growth, I think. Like,
Hmm.
and so now it's like more of understanding, like, oh, these are the good channels. Okay, why are they good? And then sort of understanding that. So for us specifically, one thing I never realized until recently we started being more data driven about things was like how much of our growth was being driven by referrals.
Hmm.
So that's a very healthy sign for business. I'm super happy to sort of discover that, but I never really thought about it.
Okay.
And then it's like, well, maybe we should have a thing where we offer people like a small incentive for referring their friends. Okay,
Hmm.
well, what does that look like? What are the different ways? Like, do we pay them just when people sign up, when they give names, like these types of things?
Yep.
None of this sounds like rocket science, but just tracking this.
No, I mean it's great. Like, and it's cool that you're educating yourself on it as well. I'm forgetting. Do you have a co-founder, by the way, or is it just you?
It's just me.
Okay.
They were co-founders for the very first part of the journey, but it's been like
Okay.
6 or 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good that you're surrounding yourself with some growth guys. Because usually you'll have like two co-founders, one technical and one who's more passionate about growth and all the other business stuff, right? So it's definitely a little tougher when you're on your own, whether you're technical or just business. Usually the business guy has more trouble than the technical. At least you can build something. That's pretty cool. So I wanted to know about your thoughts because you're looking to potentially raise a Series A, and we touched base on this earlier on, but Southeast Asia is not a country, as we know, and each country is very different. But when you talk to VCs, for some reason, their interest when they're funding you, especially when you reach Series A, you kind of have to have a roadmap into expansion. That's something that they're really keen on, regardless of how big your country is. And Vietnam has a pretty large population on its own. But that's a question that will come up, I'm pretty sure, when you raise your next round is what other countries you're looking at, how you want to how do you plan to go about that? I know that that's a question we received when we were raising. What are your thoughts on that overall?
I think overall,
You
I
can be
think
as
there's this
careful
sort
as
of
you
like,
want.
yeah, no, like, and I mean, I'll maybe like edit this later, but I think there's like this sort of weird wink, wink, like understanding between founders and VCs, because I don't think VCs are so naive to think it would be easy. At the same time, like I feel like there needs to be a thesis for them to justify investing in you, right?
Hmm.
And I don't think there's very, very few companies, perhaps outside Indonesia, that can say, hey, we can bring 100x. Like we can be like, even Indonesia, right? Even like, Tokopedia, like they had to like merge, right, to get to sort of the size they wanted to
Hmm.
be in.
Hmm.
So I think if there's sort of this wink, wink, like, hey, we'll figure it out later. Like we'll fundraise now, and then then the next it's sort of like Tiger Global's problem in the future. Like I think there's a little bit of that between two, but also that's because I think it's not based on the business. It's not impossible. It's not unprecedented, right? Like if you have
Hmm.
this for the right team, like I mean, Grab did do it. Uh,
Exactly. I mean, you can name probably 5 companies that
yeah,
did it successfully, right?
yeah, but at the same time, like man, like can you like to me, like Grab is like so operationally heavy, such a
It
like
is.
a
Yeah,
hands-on
it's
business.
crazy. Hmm.
And if they were able to do it, okay, like it's not impossible. And like with enough money, if you raise $12 billion, will you figure it out? Like possibly, right? Like Grab did. When it comes to specifically coder school, I think as long as you have a few reasons why it wouldn't not work, meaning like are there any things that, like for example, I wonder if like if you're like in banking or fintechs, and that could actually be a thing. Like oh, there's like different regulations that make this
Hmm.
potentially fundamentally impossible, where you have to start over, like, things like that. Um, when it comes to education, for me, I think the one thing I've been mindful about is uh, within Vietnam specifically, there's this really strong focus on K-12. So actually, most businesses in Vietnam, education ed tech you'll talk to will be primarily K-12. there's a huge amount of household spending on K-12 education, and a lot of really great businesses in that space. So people always ask me, like, why don't you teach children to code? That seems like a really good bet for the future. Your kids are going to learn more and more. And my answer has always been, like, I think that would stop us from expanding regionally. I think that, adult education actually does look more similar than, like, I don't think people in Thailand would learn that differently. Like, it's the same. Build a website, build your Instagram, build your thing. But the younger you go, I think the more localized it needs to become. Like, and I see that sort of in the edtech region space. Like, it's not like Baijus can really come outside of India, or the Indonesia is a really big one. Ramon Guru, who hasn't really made outside Indonesia either. So, like, I think for us, there's like some thesis there that like this could be something that grows regionally, and I think that's like the Series A. That's what investors need to.
Gonna be a discussion for sure. Like, because you guys are an online teaching platform or learning platform, and coding is mostly in English, right? So the curriculum is in the local language, but then all of the coding components of your education are in English. Like, how did you figure that out?
This is like a really interesting ongoing sort of like product discussion, which is, how do you sort of stay true to what makes you different while also like listening to your customers? So the very first few Coder School classes were all taught in English by me, since I don't speak Vietnamese at all. And people really like that. People like are like, oh wow, like he's from America, he's speaking English. It's like, of course, there's like this idea that that's sort of like worth more or more valuable. And at some point, we're like, look, I think this is sort of limiting our growth for sort of obvious reasons. And then, but at the same time, it's like, well, then how do you still sort of cling to what makes you special? And for us, what we settled on was, we'll do our written material in English. So all like the online exercises and everything you read and write is in English. And I think that's particularly important for technical jobs, because you need to Google for stuff. You need to
for sure
find stuff, at least today. And so you need to be able to like converse, and that makes your career options so much wider if you have some working English proficiency.
Right.
But we changed our like speaking and listening to Vietnamese. So unless people specifically request to be English, but that's very few people.
So like the coach / mentor, they'll be talking to them in Vietnamese, right?
Yes, and the videos that we record are actually in Vietnamese. Language.
I'm just trying to see how much work will be needed to replicate this in another country versus if you're a purely an English platform. In that case, you'd basically be able to expand pretty fast, right?
Yeah, so it's also a good question there too, which is like, how much of localization is just like language? And it's actually, I think the more you do it, I think this is why companies fail. It's like, it's not just actually translating everything to different language. That's certainly a big part of it. One thing that's really interesting is we have tried these like AI tools to automatically translate our videos. And actually it's like not bad. It's
80%, right?
It's surprisingly good. But when we like launch it, it's not, people aren't like super into it, right? And maybe it's at 20%.
It's not as engaging or something. Well, yeah, I'd say like, what I've found, especially like creating content, if you're gonna use translation tools like Automatic using AI, you'll get 80% of the content kind of right, and it might be enough versus the amount of value or like the amount of effort you've put into it, like what value you're getting for it, right? But in your case, it's like a professional setting, and the output is your entire value, right? So probably not something you want to cheap out on the 20% that lacks there,
right? But actually, it's like it's like partially it's a factor of the translation not being exactly on. But yeah, if it's actually like this, what you said, like this professional setting, somehow like if you like you can imagine like we could translate. I think they have like AI tools to like change people's lips or whatever. Like you could translate like the most famous whatever professor speaking your language, but like it still doesn't feel right. Like and one of the sort of concepts that Coder School is pushing is like we're trying to really localize the experience in more ways than one. Like this one-on-one experience is super intimate. Like you feel like it's that inefficiency actually that like makes it meaningful. It's like, oh, this person's listening to me. I can ask them questions and things like that. So once you start like breaking that. Then you get into this other like type of product, which I think is more like masterclass. It's like, oh, I can learn from Steph Curry, or I can learn from this, but it's a very different feel. And so that's why I
Right.
think that's like why I think our experiments haven't really worked out that well.
Okay. Um, I'm a big nerd in terms of, using AI to automate a lot of your business. That was one example. Have you tried to explore, or are you actively using AI for anything else in your business, regardless of what it is?
I think AI is still looking for that killer use case in a lot of ways. Um, and I think education is like number one. So I think that's the biggest one. And what was like the first controversy when AI came out? It was that kids are using it on their essays in school, right? Like
Hmm.
those are the
Hmm.
first things. It's like all this sort of like BS like that we sort of have to do can like certainly suddenly be automated. Um, and so when it comes to like coding and especially in like this type of stuff, I think AI is going to be huge. Particularly for me, it's just like I mean, I was just doing this today. It's like I've explained what a variable is in coding like I don't know a million times at this point. But it's like there's still like new ways to do it. There's still like there's certain analogies that work for some people that don't work for other people. Like there's like these different like customized view, and that's like we're really interested in using AI for is like how can we explain things in different ways. And like AI is what's so amazing about the AI is like it's just infinite patience, right? We've all been there with a
Yeah.
teacher who like we appreciate who can just explain like I still don't get a teacher. Well, no, it's like this, and eventually you'll get it, right? But it's like that
Hmm.
patience, and
Yeah,
somehow
yeah,
AI
that's a
has
good
that.
one.
It's like how do we bring that into the educational experience? And like so much of what we are trying to do actually is when you talk about engagement is just like the student feeling safe to ask a question, and then bam, like the learning is almost guaranteed to happen afterwards. But people are just for various reasons, like mainly because people aren't infinitely patient, like can't ask questions and things like that.
Hmm.
So that's where I see AI helping a lot, and it also helps
So,
that AI is like right.
so you've already started embedding like, educational co-pilots into your curriculums, or is that something you're looking into? That,
It's something we're
the
looking into.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we haven't launched it just yet, but
It's
that's
funny.
something
A
we're
lot of
interested in.
my developer friends are building their own sort of educational co-pilots for coding. Like they want to teach themselves a new language or something like that. They'll just build a co-pilot that will help them teach this language or whatever. It's pretty cool. So I know that's coming. I agree with you. I was curious, like, you know, you're talking to coders, you're teaching coders, and coders are probably, or developers are probably the ones that use AI the most right now. Like, it's incredible how much of the code can be either emitted or reviewed by AI. So, have you created like a completely new curriculum around using AI as a coder? Is that something you've done yet, or is that something you're looking into?
It's not really so there's like kind of two aspects of this. There's one is like how do you build these actual applications themselves? Like you have to call the OpenAI API, and there's like different ways to call it, stream it, true, false, like these things. So we actually have built some stuff around that. So how to use it, how to build these
Hmm.
things, but specifically like how to search for things in AI, like how do you ask questions, how do you prompt engineer the right answers? We haven't done that yet. It's something I really want to do, but I think the corollary that um, I don't know if it's a standalone skill. And the example I have is like before AI. I mean, we've had AI forever, which is like we've had Google forever. And the number one thing that I used to teach people when they join class is like, how do you Google for the right thing? Like you can't just like in Google, you can't just like say my code doesn't work, right? Like you have to be like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
here's like what, right? And here's how you search Stack Overflow, and here's like how you like. If you look at an experienced engineer, they will just like Google it slightly different
Hmm.
than a newbie would.
Agree. Yeah.
And so I think like AI is sort of like that, where I don't think it's like a people think that there's a magic skill, but like how do you Google better? Like there's probably some like principles that people use, but I don't think it's like a skill in of itself. If that makes sense. I
Yeah,
could
I
be
think
way
it's
off there.
it's more about having the foresight of using Google for certain things that other people might just like be stomped on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So same thing for AI, right? I try to integrate into basically everything that I'm doing,
Oh,
just
cool.
because. Yeah, I mean, over like whether it's personal or for work, I interrogate it and I try to structure my questioning like within a certain framework because I'm looking to output X. And I think like coders have the most use out of it because now the amount of code base you can feed your AI and query it, I think is incredible. So just this the reason I'm curious about that.
Yeah, and specifically people, I mean, like the way that this question is maybe leading to is people inevitably will ask like, oh, do you think AI is going to replace coders, or does it still make sense to learn coding when all this AI stuff is happening? And so I'm like sort of I want to preempt that question because it's very common. And the argument I make, which sounds a little self-serving, is actually it's more important to know coding now, because in a world where AI is doing most of the things for you, when you make a mistake, when it makes a mistake, or not like exactly makes a mistake, but just does like something that's not quite there. Like if you don't know what's happening at all, if it's like a magic wand that waving, you are like so doomed. And so there have been times when we've done some experiments, like we've had sort of beginners like build code like just all entirely with AI and stuff, and it often works. But then like an experienced person look at it and be like, well, that's this is going to cause you problems like later, right? Or you need to understand why, or like, can you change this? And they're like, oh, I don't know how, right? So they have to start over again from scratch,
Right.
things like that. And we've all had OpenAI hallucinate on us
Sure.
for non-coding things, and so like for coding things absolutely hallucinates all the time too.
Of
And
course.
there's actually a thing where you can sort of almost predict. I don't know. I've now developed a feel for like, hey, it's going to get this thing wrong, but like, or oh, they made this type of error. I can't like, but like, oh, I know how to fix that. Like, and it's actually it just still helps me a lot. But yeah, if I had no coding experience, it would be questionable whether it was helping me that much.
Yeah. No, I agree with you for sure. I mean, a trend to keep an eye on for sure. Speaking of, you probably saw in the news Sam Altman trying to build his own chip facility, trying to raise $7 trillion. Like, any thoughts on that?
Let's do it, man. I'm all for it. I think like it's so amazing how fast it's become. So how it affects me personally is not so much that like you're going to build a factory or something, but it's just like inspiring to see other people like doing stuff. I feel like one thing I was talking about with sort of one difficulty with starting a startup in Southeast Asia, I think, is just because people aren't as used to crazy things happening. So when I live in San Francisco, like, I mean, I think the best thing about San Francisco is I have several friends who are like billionaires now because they started random companies, right? And then became super smart. And it's not like they were some sort of superhuman people. They were like, there are people that I thought I was smarter than, and it turns out I was not, right? But people, you just see people doing extraordinary stuff everywhere. And like when it comes to Sam Altman and stuff, like, yeah, he's trying to build like 7 trillion. Like most people would never even imagine that, right? And
Yeah.
And in the face of that, when I go to my marketing intern, I'm like, yo, like you need to double your leads for next month. Like that's impossible. Like, dude, this guy is like building rockets to Mars. He's building a 7 billion. Like, come on.
Yep. Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that. That's a conversation I have all the time with investors and other founders in Southeast Asia. Is like why Southeast Asia is considered behind in the startup scene. There's like so many factors, but one thing that stands out to me, and you can let me know your thoughts. You've been in Asia for quite a while. Is that first of all, like there's a very small middle class overall. So most children who do go through university will have to support their families later on. And that's the expectation in Southeast Asian families. And the rational way to do that, and the expectation from families, is for them to work a corporate job, something steady. And as much as they would have the ambition to build something, and maybe the brightness and the intelligence and the idea to do it, they're just like held back by family traditions and family requirements to fulfill. And to me, like that's the number one driver. I've spoken to many people, but I'm curious to know your thoughts, if you've seen anything similar, or if you think there's something else that I'm missing.
I heard this amazing story from another founder in Thailand, and it was really funny. It was that sorry, it's a little off topic, but I think it's related. They used to have this problem in Thailand where they were a startup and they would interview these people, and people wouldn't show up for the first day of work. And it was like, why is this happening? And then they realized that it was like a family obligation. Like these people would find this job, be really good, but then when they went to their family, like, oh, I'm starting work on Monday. It's like this new startup. Their family would be like, no, you need to go work for CP Group or something like that.
Yeah.
So they had this problem. So then this founder thought about it, and what he did was then he like made like a little booklet flyer thing. And in that, it talked about his company. It was a picture of him, like standing next to some famous like minister or something, and just everything that made the company look like really amazing on paper. And the purpose was not for the candidate at all. It was like, hey, take this. And, like,
that's amazing.
This is your family.
I love it.
And then bam, like 100%. And then he took the next step, which was once a year he would host like a family day. And they had a nice office and stuff. It was a startup, but they were they're doing well, so they had a nice office and stuff. And so they would invite all the mothers and fathers and grandparents and stuff to come to the office, and then they would come see like this really nice office and see like all this stuff, and then like he said that his retention just went to the roof. Like people never
Wow.
want to leave, and people would want to quit, and then their mom or dad would be like, "You can't quit. That company's
That's
amazing. Like you need to
amazing.
stay and work at that company, right?" And this
Oh
was like a
wow.
very Thailand thing.
I think that's a very Southeast Asian thing. Like, have you tried that? It's brilliant.
Yeah, so it's yeah, it's hard to maintain. Like it's
Hmm.
so weird, right? But like no, I think the thing I didn't do this year. Now I'm telling you the story. I realized I should have done this year. But a couple years ago, what I did was one tradition in Vietnam is every Lunar New Year you make a sort of gift basket.
Hmm.
It has like some nuts and wine in
Yep.
it. But then like the one year I like wrote a letter. You always like write a little letter, and then one year I like wrote a letter to the parents of the people who are taking their stuff home, and I think like, people love that, and
Wow.
that really was like well received.
Yeah, and that's like we're talking about culture differences and all that. Founders need to adapt, and it's like it's a harsh kind of learning curve when you move to Southeast Asia. I'm talking about founders who want to have the ambition to come and build something here. You really have to be on the ground. You have to spend time. Like, there's no way you're going to come up with your Silicon Valley idea and be like, hey, I'm going to replicate this here and it's going to work. Like, I would not bet money on that, to be honest. But if you spend 6 months, a year, learn all the ins and outs, you'll see that your startup idea will probably evolve like 180. So that's a really good story. It definitely explained like the sort of how startups are kind of looked down on by families overall for their kids to work at. It still doesn't answer for me like the lack of startup founders and the creation of companies. So it kind of fills the gap in terms of like the perception of startups, but I think there's still like a big mystery around why there are so few founders. You know what I mean?
I don't think it's that mysterious. I think well, there's a couple things. I think one is it's just hard, right? Like I would imagine if you're trying to start a startup in the U.S. in 1980, like like whatever the Apple guys were, like before Silicon, like when whatever Silicon Valley was becoming Silicon Valley, I'm sure people were like, "What the hell are you doing?" Like
Yeah.
like and you just like and I'm sure there's like for all the companies that we hear about, like all the Microsofts and Apples out there, there's a billion companies that we just never heard about.
Of
And so I
course,
think
yeah.
we're sort of perhaps in that like just a little earlier
So we're still
stage.
like kind of lagging on the rest of the world, or like at least the Western world, right?
There's less experience, right? And I think that what the real Silicon Valley thing happened was that all the people who were there at Apple and Microsoft went and started their own companies, and like they went and started Oracle, and then all the Oracle people went and started Salesforce. Like
The
you actually have to,
mafias, right?
yeah, the PayPal mafia, exactly. But you
Yeah,
actually like have to learn the thing by going through it, and
yeah.
then it becomes sort of easy. So I think there's just like a very not a lot of people who have that sort of trajectory. But I think the other thing is just like this is a personal pet peeve of mine. Like there's sometimes people try to be like the Silicon Valley or something, like, oh, this is the Silicon Valley of whatever of this
Hmm.
country. And to me, it's like, well, that's why you can never do that, right? Like in a deeply
Hmm.
innovative field where you're trying to build something new for the first time, like if you're trying to be like someone else, like you're not going to make it. And that's what I love about sort of Silicon Valley is like Silicon Valley, like they were like they are the Silicon Valley, right? They're not the something and something else.
Right.
And so often in Silicon Valley, I feel, or sorry, in Southeast Asia, you're trying to sort of imitate other people, and people aren't like thinking. I think you've already lost at that point because you're like, I want to be as good as that guy. Like you'll never be the
Hmm.
person you want to be as good at.
It's good
And
inspiration though,
so,
but I agree with you. I completely see it. It's hard to be fully original though, especially when you want to. Like we're talking about building an ecosystem of something that already exists. You can't reinvent yourself completely. Like
yeah,
you're still a copy of something else, unless you're building a whole new industry out of thin air. You know what I mean?
yeah. It's like how can I be the best? Like you need to want to be the best. You had to have that confidence that you can do it, right? I think part of it is like, oh, we could be a smaller version of that for this country. Like just like this kind of
Hmm.
thing already puts you at such a disadvantage. It's like you wouldn't want to become like the Roger Federer of Vietnam. Like you don't you want to be like Roger Federer, right? Like you want to win. And I think
Agree.
that's like when it kind of bring it back is like that's what I think people aren't just ambitious enough. It's like, hey, like yeah, they're opening a $7 trillion like factory. Like why can't we do that? Of course, there's like a lot of stuff in the way, but like let's go to Mars. Let's like do these things.
I completely agree with you, but you mentioned a few names earlier, and you built a company, and when you present yourself to an investor, you present yourself as the something of something else, right?
Yeah,
You know what I
of
mean?
course.
We're all victims of it. It's just so much easier to explain, even though that's not the end all. It's just such an easy way to explain it and for someone else to understand it, right?
Yeah, totally. No, I get it, and we go feel it. But like, I guess like the one thing, I mean, you talked about. So I'm a little triggered because like the thing you're saying is something I think about a lot, which is like you're not going to come in as a Silicon Valley founder and just be like, hey, here's a playbook, let's do it. And yeah, I can't agree with you more on like the sort of naive arrogance of people who do that, yet people do it. But at the same time, like one thing I hope that I never lose is the thought that we can be. There's nothing like maybe like to put in concrete terms. Like one thing I see a lot in Southeast Asia is like these companies who hire so many people, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
cost of labor is low, and like you raise $1 million, you can hire like 100 people if you want. It's like a value that's like 2 engineers, and but like people do this because there's this like sort of assumption that like people aren't as good, or like I can't get as good talent here,
Mm-hmm.
or there's something about that, and I'm like, no,
Yep.
like we have to like demand excellence at every level. I'm like, look, why are you not as productive as that person? Like what is stopping there? And like of course there's like real reasons here, right? But like, can we dig into those? Can we just stop accepting that we need to hire 5 times so many people here than we would somewhere else? Like, no,
I
I think
could
there's
not
like,
agree more. Yeah, that's a really good point, and I've been a victim of it. So I completely understand where you're coming from. I didn't know it was that common. So I'm glad that you make me feel better that I wasn't the only one doing that. But it's hard. How do you get more out of someone? That's actually a really interesting topic. How do you get more out of people? Is it something you have to do upstream in your hiring process, or do you like mold them to what you're expecting of them? What's your strategy with that?
yeah, I wish I had figured it out. And I think I've been all over the map on this, and I just keep going back to like what worked for me. And I'm not like the most amazing person, but I mean, like you and I probably like also were subject to like how do we perform better, and like that's what sort of led us to start our own companies. But like to me, it was just like people assumed I could do it. Like my first job, I remember like in Silicon Valley, I used to work for this real company called Palm. It was like we made the first smartphone before the iPhone. But like on
The
my first
Palm
day of work, they
Pilot?
were like, "Yeah, I worked on the Palm Pilot." Yeah,
Oh, sick.
yeah, it was cool. It was awesome. I love it. And they were like, "Oh, you're in charge of this screen." I'm like a fresh college grad, like, "Oh, you're in charge of like this screen." It was not a huge screen. I was working on the Wi-Fi settings panel. So like when you go to Wi-Fi and like you search for like
Yeah,
Wi-Fi networks, like in that list, I was the guy in charge of that list. But
super
then I was
cool.
like, but yeah, but it's super cool, right? I'm like, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, holy shit, I have to like learn. But like that pushed me. I'm like, man, like I gotta like I'm responsible for this thing. And I was kind of like, why do they think I can do it? Like I don't even know Palm OS, like the whole new iOS. But they were just like, you can do it, like go. And like, of course, it's not just like there was support and stuff, but like just that assumption where people started like, you're in charge of this thing, and you got to figure it out.
Hmm.
And when it comes to startups and stuff, I think like like I think the interesting thing about iterative, right? Like in the more YC style, it's not like the venture studio, which is like, here's the 3 ideas, you work on them, and we'll pay you this much money. Like,
Hmm.
it's just like, what do you want to do? Like, you have to come to us and tell us what you're doing, right? We're
Hmm.
not, the iterative program is not about telling you like you must do these 3 things.
Right.
It's like you have questions, check in with us, and we counsel you. But ultimately, it's like we expect you to build $100 million company or $1 billion company or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And just that mindset shift, I feel like is just so uncommon. It's one of the other sort of iterative people, Leah. She always talks about how sometimes you feel like startups here are like trying to still get A in school. They're like,
Hmm.
professor, like, what do I need to do to get A? And it's like, you got
Yeah.
to get out of that.
Yeah. So I had lunch with Suken yesterday, actually. So we
Oh,
were
nice.
talking a lot about all these different ideas, like how different VCs handle startups differently, right? And you're right. Like iterative is very hands off. Like they'll of course have all the interventions that they do, but like if you have to come to them basically, and there's all these other funds, A16Z and all that are much more like a talent agency whereby you have this idea, you're a brilliant founder, we'll provide you all the tools. Like, you need this, here, use this is the best in class. You need a chief of staff, we'll provide you one, we'll hire the best, and because of our reputation, we'll bring them on. And basically, like, they leverage their network and their knowledge to hype you up, build you up. So two different models, right? And seems like in Asia, because of, like, maybe there's still a very big hierarchy, there's the family traditions and all, maybe the Asian founders need more of this kind of like hand holding VC that will, have the founder will be great, the idea will be great, but they'll cater to all the other needs to make sure that they perform at peak performance, essentially. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I forgot how we got on this topic originally, but yeah, why are there not more founders? Yeah, there was more startups, right? Like, essentially, yeah, that it's because
it's hard.
I think that it's hard. Yeah,
it's hard. It is hard. It's super hard. And speaking of hard, like, if you weren't working on what you're doing right now, which I'm sure you're going to be working on for quite a while, is there something else you'd be working on, like a startup that you have in mind that it's itching you, but you can't work on it because you're obviously committed to this?
Yeah, obviously committed to it. I think, like, ultimately, one thing that's really interesting about starting a company is you start to think about why you're doing it a lot. So I kind of alluded this before, like, why I could be just sitting in my shorts, making the same amount of money, break even, or actually be losing less money. So you think about why I did it, and it's definitely changed for me over time. But I think ultimately, one thing I really enjoy is just solving things that annoy me. Like, why is the world not this way? And you sort of like dig into it. You're like, I don't understand why it's not this way. To me, like, education is like the biggest one of those things. Like, how is it that everything in the world has gotten so much better? Like, like the Palm Pilot to the iPhone is like 1,000 million times better, right? And yet, like, the way that I learned to program on it is maybe worse. Like, I don't understand why that's happening. And, like, education in general over the past hundreds of years has not gotten better. Like I said, I think Coursera is not like intensely better than whatever came before it. So I think that's why I'm motivated to work on education. There's also some other things about why I find it meaningful. But if you ask me, like, on that similar thing, I think, especially with, like, sort of my experience a little bit with this venture fund stuff, I think this is common I'm curious if you had the same feeling. Like, I might want to solve smaller problems next time around if I wasn't doing this. Like, perhaps you could say lifestyle business, but I would just want to solve, like, small problems well, and, like, just have a very clear, like, value proposition. Like, this is exactly what we do. One of my inspirations in life has always been this guy, the inventors. So particularly, like, my favorite coffee maker is the AeroPress. I don't know if you're familiar with the AeroPress coffee.
I am, yeah.
And this guy, like, he just ran around inventing stuff. So he like, one day he was like, you know what, like, making a cup of coffee is, like, way harder than it needs to be. Let me invent a machine that does it cheaply. Before that, he built, like, this frisbee thing. He's like, oh, why frisbees seem like they should be able to go farther. Like, let me build one. So, like, he's, like, always just kind of solve these small problems, and I found that really interesting. To me, that's the thing that I would, like, love to think about with AI. So all the different things we can automate. Like, we've all run businesses. Like, we all see, like, how crazy inefficient so many things are around, like, HR. I think particularly, like, for me, it's like, oh my god, like, this is why do we have such huge HR organizations, right? Like, and that's been one thing for me that I think I would love to tackle. Small things like, there's, like, everything I do around HR is just like, why is it so difficult? For example, like, we just went through performance reviews, and I was like, oh my god, this is so hard to do performance reviews. I'm sure that there's tons of stuff there. And the other thing that was really, really hard for me recently, which I found really interesting, was taking wedding photos. Okay. So to me, I was like, there cannot be a better use case for AI. Like, think of all the training data, all these wedding photos that are super high res and look exactly the same and are all in the same studio. And you want me to pay how many $1,000 and sit here for how many hours to take that, to try to recreate that other photo? Like, that's literally what AI can do. So that's
actually a really good, like, an existential question around AI, because, like, it's like a very, like, real life sort of application. But to me, like, I got married already. You're getting married soon, right?
Yeah.
Or yeah. So I know where you're going. Like you're recreating these photos and you want the photo to look as good as possible, and you're going to be paying a few $1,000s. But at the end of the day, if you used AI to create that photo and you just face swapped or like use your face, the whole point of that photo is like to bring a memory, right? It's not just to illustrate the fact that you're married, in my opinion. So that like it won't allude to any memories. It'll just be a momentum of you being married somehow because it's an illustration of marriage, but there's no memory to it. You know what I mean? So I think AI is still like far from it doesn't generate memories at this point. Well, Neuralink is looking into that probably. for now, for now we're not there yet. But yeah, that's a really cool idea. I mean, for the people who do it for the pure sake of the illustration, I think there's definitely a market there, and there's always a market for everything.
Yeah, I'm not gonna actually do this idea, but so I don't need to convince you. I'm not pitching for investment, but no, the way I would do it actually is I'm with you. I actually think it can't. I think a lot of these AI things are not going to replace our experiences, just augment them. So for me, it was like I had to like Chloe and I, like my wife and I, like there were like 5 different sets and 3 different outfits and stuff. And that's what it took 5 or 6 hours. I was like,
Wow.
maybe we could have taken like one photo, and then like we could have like maybe 100 of the
Yep.
photos could have been real, and then we could have had 1,000 generated.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Okay,
we took
that's
all
actually a
1,000 ourselves.
really good. That's a really good one.
And it's like, oh, I really like the face from this one. I looked in that photo, but like that suit, like all these like different combinations and permutations that like just were so painful. I think
Did you do the
so
Han
upsell.
bokeh photos or not? Like the
The
traditional Korean?
Oh yeah, this is a Korean wedding studio. Yeah, it's this
Oh,
whole
oh
Korean
wow.
thing. Yeah, did you
Amazing.
do those too?
No, I'm so pissed. I would have loved to do them. But look, we met in Canada. We got married in Canada, but then we got married in Bali. Our families came there. And then we
Oh,
were
wow.
gonna do another wedding in Korea and then another wedding in France because I'm French and Canadian. And once we got through the wedding in Bali, we're like, hell no, we are not doing anything. Like even the photos in Korea, we were not keen on doing anymore. But I kind of miss it because I'd love to see that. I love the tradition there. I think it would have been cool. Like, we can always go and take them. Like it's not a big deal. We haven't aged that much since since the wedding, so it should be okay.
That's good.
It's still legit. So before we close here, do you have anything you want to plug in the pod? Anything you want to shout out to?
I guess like the one thing I would like to plug is if there are a lot of people who are sort of feel like they have something to share on about their technical fields, I would love to get in contact with them. So I think the biggest thing we talked about actually here is that there's not that many people who are very experienced. And so I think that if we can get that cycle going a little faster, so people like you yourselves who've been through a startup, you have so much to share with people. And so thanks for doing stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could somehow, one thing we want to do at Coder School is try to build out a better mentor network. So, okay, if someone wants to become a head of growth, what's the career path to that?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no book that I can do it. I think ChatGPT can sort of help you navigate some stuff, but really ultimately come from people like yourself. So, of people listening, if you're interested in helping try to share your experiences with people, I'd love to get in touch. I'm just really looking for the people who've had the real experiences, the real war stories, and if we can productize that experience somehow,
Very
that's what
cool.
Coder School is really looking to do this coming year.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely make sure to find some people to introduce you as well. So,
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
yeah, of course, of course. Anyways, that's the pod, but it was great having you on, man. It was really cool talking to you and great meeting you as well.
Yeah, great meeting you too. Next time if you're ever in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, please look me up.